Well, for more about Africa, the Middle East, and those wanting a slice of the action in the region there, let's now cross live to Japan-based independent journalist James Corbett. James, thanks for joining us here on RT. We've had a number of analysts and journalists talking about the Chinese interest in Libya and North Africa. Of course, China is very active in this part of the world with large-scale investment and energy infrastructure. So what do you think? How do you think Beijing is actually feeling about what's happening in Libya and beyond Libya, indeed, at the moment?
Well, Beijing has to be concerned by what's going on right now, as they have so much investment, not only in Libya, as you say, but all throughout Africa. And I think the entire U.S.-AFRICOM project can't really be understood outside of the context of Sino-African relations, which have been booming since the turn of the century. And you can see that through even the media coverage over the last few years. There was more and more hand-wringing over the Chinese-African investments, to the point where it was becoming tens of billions of dollars a year. And obviously, U.S.-AFRICOM was a direct response to that. And now we see the fruits of that, really, with U.S. attempting to assert military might in the region. And you see that on February 22nd, one of the first things that the Libyan rebels attacked was the Huafeng construction company in Libya. And on February 24th, the Chinese oil company CNPC was attacked and looted by the Libyan rebels. So there's definitely been an element of these rebels being funded, perhaps not expressly, but certainly as tangentially to attack Chinese interests in Libya itself.
Wait a minute. So what you're saying is that really the underlying current here is actually the rivalry between the US and China. Some people are saying this is another Cold War. Isn't that an exaggeration? Or if not, can you explain why not?
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. I think it would be naive to think that that's the only factor at play here. But certainly, I think Chinese investment in Africa has been growing at such an incredible rate over the past several years. And Gaddafi himself has even been on record to say that he believes that China will ultimately be the major player in Africa, because Chinese aid to African countries isn't tied to humanitarian concerns the way aid from the West is, or at least supposedly is. So you see China, of course, heavily invested in Sudan and other areas with grave human rights concerns, but no strings attached to the aid that they give those countries.
But China's been very quiet, hasn't it? It actually didn't even veto, which it could have done along with Russia, that UN resolution to set up a no-fly zone. Surely it could have taken some sort of action to protect its interests if it didn't agree with the NATO military action there.
Well, that's right. But as you say, I think this is a new form of Cold War, and I don't think that the direct confrontation at the UN level is going to be happening at this point. I think they're still perhaps taking stock of the situation and still getting ready to get into a position where they can perhaps better protect their own interests.
And
but
that position, could Beijing be considered as a broker in a possible peace settlement? I had a journalist on a little earlier from London saying maybe Moscow and Beijing should be involved here if negotiation is a way forward. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think clearly if there was going to be some sort of mediated negotiation, China and Russia would obviously be the players that would be handling or at least mediating that, because they were the ones that were obviously initially against this on the UN Security Council. So they would be the obvious choice, and the obvious choice because China obviously has the interests in the region that it wants to protect.
Well, let's talk about the ongoing situation at the moment. Many saying, of course, this is a stalemate. The NATO action hasn't worked at all. President Obama is saying only with boots on the ground will a possible end to this operation be brought to a conclusion. Now, if there was a ground operation, and indeed if there was a new resolution that changed the goalposts and we saw a further military action there, what sort of political fallout could there be? Because after all, we've seen the BRICS countries recently expressing unease about what's going on there in NATO. We've seen a lot of political fallout within France, for example, over this. What do you see happening?
Yeah, as exactly what you just pointed out, I think the political fallout in France and across the NATO nations is going to increase throughout this. I think at the point where troops are on the ground, I think the action becomes something entirely different. But unfortunately, I think there might be the possibility of failing forward here and actually trying to expand what's happening. And we've certainly seen recently with Syria, the recent WikiLeaks documents have indicated that there has been intervention funded by the U.S. In that country to try to destabilize the regime there. So we might actually see this spreading instead of stopping. And that's, I think, the real danger at this point.
There's been some people on RT saying that, in effect, NATO and the US want this conflict in Libya to be prolonged, not to end. I mean, what's the thinking behind that?
Well, I think the point towards this is destabilization, not necessarily the stabilization of the area, because I think destabilization is a type of liquefaction of what's going on there, and that plays into the interests of those who aren't yet heavily invested in the area, and plays against the interests of those who do have an established investment in the area, like China.
Just finally, then, are we going to see another Afghanistan scenario, another Iraq scenario there in Libya? Just briefly, James.
I think NATO forces would like that. I think that would be a good strategy for them. But unfortunately, of course, it would be horrible for the people of the region.
Interesting to hear your point of view. Thanks very much indeed for joining us there in Osaka in Japan. Japan-based independent journalist James Corbett joining us live on RT. Thanks for your time.